Birdwatching is a wonderful way to while away the hours, and whether you live at the heart of a hustling, bustling British city or in the peace and tranquility of the countryside, it's a pastime that absolutely everyone can enjoy. What's more, it's a pleasure that the majority of us are introduced to in childhood that quite literally lasts an entire lifetime. From the cradle to the grave, birds are never very far away from us, and it's surprising how little effort is required to improve our chances of seeing a wider range of species in our own back gardens. Now, as you watch this lovely garden and the blackbirds, robins, doves and the whole host of other species that flock here daily, you may wonder how you can replicate such a bird-friendly environment in your own backyard. But take heart, it is possible and can be done in a surprisingly short amount of time. This garden was brought to life with birds over a matter of weeks rather than months, especially for filming, and with the help of a specially constructed hide for the cameras, you will get a bird's eye view of the proceedings. Many attraction techniques were of course used to make sure that a wide range of species would come to the table, so to speak, and throughout the course of this programme you'll find out just how it was done. It's a fact, bird watching is addictive. But in the case of our feathered friends, this is one addiction that happens to be very good for you. After the stresses and strains of a busy day at the office, there's nothing better to help you relax than sitting down in a much-loved armchair with a garden view to watch the birds fluttering about their business. And even better, you don't need any fancy equipment or complicated manuals to start bird watching, just a good vantage point and a handful of birdseed. Nevertheless, there are a few things that will help you on your way, and although far from being compulsory, will probably bring you better results from the outset. A good bird identification book is extremely helpful because despite being able to recognise the more obvious species like the magpie and the robin, it's good to know what you're watching. There's also a big difference between the plumage of males and females of any given species. For example, you might think that everybody would be able to spot a blackbird with its characteristic shiny jet plumage and orange-yellow bill, and this would be the case if it happened to be a male blackbird you were looking at. However, a female blackbird with her brownish-grey streaked plumage and much duller bill can be far trickier to identify. This is when other factors such as flight pattern, movement and song will be helpful, and a good bird identification book will have details of all these traits as well as colour, wing bars and general markings. We'll take a closer look at basic bird identification a little later, with a visual guide to the species that you are most likely to entice to your garden bird table with the attraction techniques featured in this programme. Historically, people have been interacting with wild birds for centuries, but the pioneer of feeding garden birds was a German nobleman who encouraged birds into his gardens with feeding devices and bird boxes. During the 20th century, the idea of bird tables developed, and as the 21st century progresses, technological advances have improved the design of bird feeders to an incredibly sophisticated degree. However, most bird watchers start on a small scale, perhaps scattering kitchen scraps out onto the lawn. This is absolutely fine, and even when you've progressed to a bird table, which you undoubtedly will, it's always worth scattering some food on the ground because there are species that prefer to feed in this way. Just remember to alter the area in which you scatter the food every so often, and don't put out more than is eaten in a day so as to avoid attracting less welcome visitors, such as rats, during the night. Also, space out your ground level offerings. This will enable more birds to feed at any one time and should help to minimise squabbling between competing birds. It's quite incredible just how many birds this simple action will bring to your garden, but there are certain household food items that will be more acceptable to the birds than others. Polyunsaturated fats may be very much better for health-conscious humans, but the traditional real fats, such as suet, will be much better for the birds. Particularly in cold weather, members of the tit family, thrushes and even woodpeckers will target high-energy fats to sustain them through the winter months. Birds are also surprisingly partial to cheese, and a mild variety grated will be very much appreciated. Robins and blackbirds are especially partial to cheese, and if you're lucky enough to have wrens feeding under a hedgerow in your garden, they will enjoy a sprinkling of grated cheese at ground level too. Leftover potatoes are really good put out in the garden, and mashed potato with real butter will be very popular with the majority of birds. It's interesting to note that the potatoes with the highest fat content, namely chips, are rarely taken by garden birds. This all may sound a bit on the stodgy side, especially as next on our list of suitable household scraps is pastry, which can be served to the birds either raw or cooked. However, birds will be delighted to find offerings of fruit put out for them as well. Windfall apples are a natural favourite, and if you don't have fresh fruit scraps, dried fruit, for example raisins or sultanas, will be equally well received. Other leftovers such as cooked rice, porridge oats and bread are also fine. Humans have been feeding bread to the birds for a long time, and in small quantities this is okay. If the bread is very dry, moisten it, and remember that nutritionally there is little value in bread for a considerable amount of bulk. However, just as happens to be the case for us, brown whole grain will be much better than white processed bread. For more specialist feeding, a bird table will make life an awful lot easier for you and the species of birds that prefer not to take food from ground level. There are many designs available, but those incorporating a simple and straightforward tray will often be the best. Look out for a raised rim around the edge so that the food doesn't fall off, but there will need to be a gap in the rim at each corner to allow rainwater to drain away. Lots of bird tables actually have roofs, but it really won't bother the birds too much either way. It's really important that you are able to clean your bird table thoroughly for hygiene reasons, so bear this in mind when you're choosing, because sometimes those that are the most visually attractive are not necessarily the most practical. However, should you not have room for a bird table, nut feeders can be very useful for attracting birds into a smaller space. A nut feeder is made of steel mesh and is the safest way of offering nuts to wild birds. It's important to ensure that the mesh size is appropriate, being large enough to stop the birds from damaging their beaks, but small enough to prevent large pieces of nuts from being taken. You'll find that a 6mm mesh is perfect, and if you buy your nut feeder from a reputable company, or better still the RSPB, you can be certain that the product you use won't put the birds at risk. Along with nut feeders, many bird watchers use seed feeders, which are tubular transparent containers with holes which the birds can take the seed from. Designed predominantly for sunflower seeds and larger seed mixes, this type of feeder will attract a delightful range of birds, including tits, siskins and greenfinches. However, Niger seeds, which are very popular, are too small for use in a seed feeder. If you want to offer Niger seeds or cereal-based mixes, you'll need to use a hopper-type feeder. Be careful to choose a hopper feeder that will drain with ease and not allow old, stale food to build up. As you can see for yourself, these birds are really enjoying all of the feeding devices mentioned, and all you need to know now is what to stock up with to keep them coming back to your garden again and again. Bird seed and mixtures are widely available, not only in pet shops but in major supermarkets as well. However, you do need to take a close look at what you are buying. A good bird feeding mixture will have plenty of flaked maize, sunflower seeds and peanut granules. Beware of any mix that contains whole or large pieces of nuts, because they would only be suitable for winter feeding. Millet and small seed is fine for attracting sparrows and finches, while flaked maize is a great favourite with blackbirds. Pinhead oatmeal is also perfectly acceptable in a seed mix, but you might like to avoid mixtures with wheat and barley grains, which will only be suitable for pigeons and doves in an urban environment. Attracting large numbers of pigeons to your garden may prove counterproductive, as they will not only discourage smaller birds, but might also upset your next-door neighbours as well. There are cheaper mixes that will have been bulked out with split peas, beans, dried rice and lentils, and again will only serve to attract larger species. However, worst of all are the mixtures containing suspicious-looking green or pink lumps. These are dog biscuits and could only be safely consumed by the birds if soaked first. When you get a little more used to bird watching, you might prefer to try specific seeds rather than mixes, and there is one type that will improve your chances of success dramatically. Black sunflower seeds are a bird watcher's best tactic, and as you will discover a little later, can virtually guarantee to bring certain species to your garden. It's fascinating to mix black sunflower seeds in a feeder with other more mundane seeds because they will always be taken first and the birds will flock in to get them. The main difference between black sunflower seeds and the striped variety is a much higher oil content, which certainly seems to explain the attraction. Also, the smaller Niger seeds mentioned a little earlier have the same high oil content, and they too are black in colour and extremely popular. Filling a nut feeder may seem a really straightforward thing to do, but you do need to be a little bit careful. Peanuts are very rich in fat and promise visits from many delightful species of bird, but you are best buying them from a reputable bird food supplier. Peanuts can have a high level of aflatoxin, a natural poison that can harm birds, and a proper bird food supplier can be trusted to provide aflatoxin-free peanuts. And don't be tempted to use salted or dry roasted peanuts. They're not suitable for feeding birds with. Earlier we discussed household scraps and how useful fats can be, and you can also buy specially made fat balls and food bars, which are especially good for winter feeding. However, if you want to make your own bird cake, you can do so very easily. Pour melted lard or suet onto a mixture of dry ingredients such as seeds, nuts, dried fruit and oatmeal. The quantities should be in the region of 1/3 fat to 2/3 dry mixture. When combined, allow the bird cake to set and then either tip it out onto your bird table, or if you've used a container that can be suspended, such as a coconut shell or tit bell, you can hang it from the table or a tree branch instead. Now, if you don't happen to be of too squeamish a disposition, there is another type of feeding you can move on to that will bring quite remarkable results. Offering live food may sound alarming, but worms and insects are the staple diet of many species. However, don't panic. You don't have to start digging worms, cultivating larvae, or catching flies. There are plenty of pet shops that supply live foods for birds, and there are many good suppliers to be found online that provide a mail order service. For feeding live foods, you will need a straight-sided dish, and these wiggling specimens are the larvae of the Tenebrio molitor beetle, better known to bird watchers as the mealworm. And when it comes to robins, blue tits and pied wagtails, there's no better attraction. They really are the perfect live food as they are vegetarian, which means birds can be safely fed mealworms without any danger of the fatal diseases that are often present in offal-fed maggots. Keeping mealworms is pretty trouble-free. All you need is somewhere cool, dark and well ventilated to store them, and feeding couldn't be simpler. Bran is perfectly adequate, or you can buy food from your live food supplier. Even better, mealworms are clean and odour-free, so you can keep the birds happy without upsetting your household. Watch out as well for mini mealworms, which are self-explanatory and especially good when there are nestlings being fed. Also, waxworms are very popular, but they can be more expensive. Other live food offerings are crickets, houseflies, fruit flies, curly flies, and common or garden earthworms. Like all bird feeding, it's a case of experimenting to see what suits your environment best. And as you learn more about birds and their appetites, you can start to really target the species that you would most like to see. Providing food for the birds will of course result in some delightful viewings. However, don't forget to always supply fresh water every day. Birds need a source of water for drinking and bathing in all year round. Bird baths can be very attractive to look at in any garden, and some of the most enjoyable bird watching experiences occur when birds are bathing. Be careful where you position a bird bath to make sure that your feathered visitors have a clear view all around. This will help them feel secure from predators, especially your next-door neighbour's cat. Remember to check the water daily in freezing conditions and never add salt or glycerine to prevent it icing over. This would really harm the birds. Far better to empty the water from the bird bath at night and refill in the morning. Having touched very lightly on the subject of your neighbour's cat, as you happily set about attracting birds to your field of vision, you do need to consider deterring unwelcome visitors. Grey squirrels can be a real nuisance emptying bird tables of food, and if you have a metal post holding your table, try smearing it with petroleum jelly to stop them in their tracks. It will also put off any marauding moggies, and if your post is wooden, encasing it with smooth plastic piping will have the same effect. You do need to protect your feeders from squirrels as well as your bird table, and you can buy squirrel-resistant feeders and guards if you think you might have a lot of squirrels in your area. When you attract large numbers of songbirds to your garden, you may also inadvertently attract their predators as well. However, this is a natural phenomenon, and you will not increase the numbers of songbirds being taken by magpies and sparrowhawks further up the food chain. It's simply that you are more likely to see the more unpleasant side of nature in your garden. In point of fact, if you end up attracting a sparrowhawk, this would mean that the songbird population in your vicinity is very healthy indeed, and nature's balance should not be interfered with. However, domestic cats are a different story. They are not natural predators and do not hunt in order to survive. Think carefully about where you place your bird table and feeders, and if you have cats of your own, a collar with a bell will at least alert the birds to their presence in time for them to fly off into the wild blue yonder. Before we move away from the bird table, we do need to take a closer look at hygiene. When many birds congregate at a given point, i.e. your bird table, the risk of disease increases. If food takes days to clear, cut back the amount you are putting out. Regularly scrub the bird table, feeding trays and water containers. Use a 10% disinfectant solution, but rinse several times to ensure all the chemical is removed. This should mean that diseases like Salmonella and E. coli are not spread. When cleaning containers used for bird feeding, don't bring them indoors. Wash everything outside, and this will reduce the risk of spreading germs further afield. And of course, always give your hands a really thorough wash when you've finished, or better still, use protective gloves. And now everything has been put in place, it's time for the real fun to begin, as we sit back, relax, and make ourselves comfortable while we watch the birds. For the majority of bird watchers, being able to recognise the species that they are observing makes the experience all the more satisfying. However, it can be a little tricky to start with. Firstly, try and estimate the size of the bird, comparing with species that you do know. The same goes for the shape of the bird, and take special note of the bill and the legs. The type of bill a bird has will give you lots of clues, with a small, short, stout bill suggesting a seed eater, maybe a finch or a sparrow, while a large hooked bill will indicate a bird of prey. Many bird watchers keep notebooks to help them, and this also forms a useful record of bird activity in any given environment. The second consideration relates to the bird's colour, and noting down carefully what you've seen will help you use a bird identification book. Should you still be unsure, listening to the bird's song and watching its flight pattern may be the deciding factor. Here's a brief summary of top tips for bird watching. Get to know the names used for the parts of the bird's body so that your notes match the descriptions you will find in an identification guide. Don't forget your notebook. It will help you improve your powers of observation. Listen out for bird calls and song. They can confirm visual identifications. Always respect a bird's welfare. Don't risk frightening it in order to get a better view. Understand the area that you are watching birds in. Is there woodland nearby? Do you live near the coast? Certain species have specific habitats. For example, you are unlikely to spot a woodpecker if you live in the centre of a tree-free housing estate, so make sure your identifications reflect this. Part of the joy of bird watching is the fact that there are rare sightings, but generally speaking, if a species does not occupy your area, then you have probably misidentified it. To help you on your way, we've compiled a list of the most regularly spotted birds across the UK, plus a few of the more unusual visitors to gardens that might just pop up at well-stocked bird tables. Throughout this programme, we've talked about the blackbird as being one of Britain's most recognisable birds, and as already explained, only the male has the jet black plumage and bright yellow-orange bill. The female's duller plumage makes her much harder to distinguish, especially if she's with similar-looking thrushes. However, an agitated blackbird protecting its nest, whether male or female, will let out a shrill alarm call that sounds like a rattle, and it's absolutely unmistakable. Nevertheless, when it comes to song, the blackbird is a clear and melodious contributor to the dawn chorus. Wherever you happen to live, the blackbird is very probably Britain's most spotted species, abundant nationwide, residing in gardens, woodland and areas of scrub. So this is one bird-watching treat that we can all enjoy. Next on the list of easily recognisable birds that you will be able to attract to your garden is the robin, with its characteristic red breast. Both the male and female robin have the red breast, but the juveniles lack the famous colouring. Nevertheless, identification is also confirmed by the pin-thin legs of the robin that have earned this species the nickname spindleshanks. Despite the robin's association with Christmas, this is a bird you will see all year round, all over the country. A well-stocked bird table will encourage robins into your garden, and a dish of live food, especially mealworms, will guarantee success. There are many species of birds that will always shy away from contact with humans, but if you treat a robin kindly, this intelligent little bird can become quite tame. Now, when it comes to recognition, the magpie, resplendent with black and white plumage, is one of the easiest birds to spot, but is not one that you are necessarily going to want to attract to your garden. Nevertheless, unless you live in the most northerly parts of Scotland, from where the magpie is absent, if there is a source of food, magpies will be there. This is a very successful species, and the growth in magpie numbers has been cited as a reason for the decline in the songbird population. You will not be able to discourage magpies, but if you try to keep your bird table offerings small, they're likely to look elsewhere for richer pickings. In the same vein, the crow has an equally sinister reputation when it comes to stealing eggs and nestlings, and you may well be visited by them whether you live in the town or the country. This large bird with black plumage and a powerful black bill is very distinctive, and its loud caw cry, often in a sequence of 3, is quite eerie. Another member of the crow family that is equally widespread across Britain is a jackdaw, and this scavenger is well known for stealing anything bright and shiny that happens to catch its strikingly pale eye. Rather smaller than the crow and the magpie, the jackdaw will also take the eggs and chicks of smaller birds, so it may not be the most welcome of visitors. However, do watch out for jackdaws in flight. The displays they put on are spectacular. And despite all the jackdaw's bad press, there's something lovable about this rogue of the bird world. After learning how to identify 3 birds that may be less than absolutely desirable at garden bird tables, let's take a look at some delightful feathered guests that we're always pleased to see. This is a chaffinch, the most abundant of Britain's finches, although it sports a plumage that any rare bird would be proud of. Watch out for the blue-grey crown, pink breast and chestnut back that will be most pronounced on the male bird during the summer months. Although the female is less bright, she nonetheless is fairly easy to spot, simply being a paler version of her mate. At bird tables, the chaffinch will enjoy a wide variety of seeds, and this is one species that always appreciates a scattering of traditional breadcrumbs. Should you be a town dweller, when autumn comes, chaffinches will disappear from view, heading for the natural harvest of the countryside. But fear not, come the winter they'll be back to make the most of garden feeders. Another delightful member of the same family is the greenfinch, with its bright green-yellow plumage. Again, the male carries the strongest colouring, with the female being darker. A ready supply of peanuts and sunflower seeds will give you the best chance of seeing a greenfinch, and word seems to spread fast between greenfinches because you may well get a flock of them if they approve of the food on offer. Interestingly, there is another finch that looks very similar to a greenfinch called a siskin that you could see almost anywhere in Britain today, although once it was only indigenous to the conifer plantations of the Scottish Highlands. As this habitat has spread south, so has the siskin. To distinguish between the two, remember that the siskin is a little smaller than the greenfinch, the male possessing a more yellow plumage and a black cap, which the female lacks. However, there is an absolute giveaway if a siskin visits your garden, as it will take nuts from a feeder with its head hanging down, whereas a greenfinch will feed head up in a more conventional manner. It's also worth noting that siskins appear to be more drawn to red nut holders than any other type, so if you'd like to attract siskins, it's worth giving this a try. While we're on the subject of finches, here's a quick mention for the goldfinch, which, although less common than the others we've looked at, may often pop up at a well-stocked bird table where woodland is close by, especially if thistles are abundant. Both male and female goldfinches have wonderfully colourful faces, and their black and gold wings make a stunning display in flight. This is one species that really will respond to black sunflower seeds, so loading your feeding area with them could well bring goldfinches into view. Now, our next two species tend to be considered as rather common visitors to British gardens. However, both sparrows and starlings have suffered something of a decline over recent years, most noticeably in urban environments where pollution is rife, and should therefore never be taken for granted. The sparrow is a delightful little bird, and although many people consider it to be brown, It has black and grey plumage with rich chestnut markings. Their cheeky, boisterous personalities make this a fascinating bird to watch, although its song is far from lovely. When attempting to attract a mate, the male will sing his unmusical song very loudly, and we can only hope that it appeals more to the female sparrow than it does to human ears. Starlings are also delightful birds to watch, with their glossy, iridescent plumage showing purple, green and blue reflections. There are also speckles on the belly, while the starling's bustling character, swaggering and squabbling with the other birds, is absolutely charming. Yet this once prolific species is actually on the RSPB's Red Danger List, as measures are taken to ensure the starling is protected. It would be impossible to discuss the popular species that visit British garden bird tables without mentioning members of the tit family, and they will undoubtedly give any birdwatcher hours of entertainment. This is a blue tit with a sky blue crown, bright yellow underparts and single white bar on a blue wing. Despite being a tiny creature, this bird really does have attitude, being noisy, effervescent and colourful. It's almost worth setting up a bird table for this species alone, but if conditions suit the blue tit, the great tit will undoubtedly visit you as well. At first glance, the great tit could be confused with the blue tit, but on closer inspection, they are quite different. Firstly, the great tit is much larger and more dominant in its behaviour, muscling other smaller birds out of the way to get to the food. Secondly, the markings are bolder, and although the great tit carries similar colouring to the blue tit, it has a black crown rather than sky blue. It also has a broad black stripe running down the breast. The great tit is equally as bustling and lively as the blue tit, and equally as fascinating to watch. Other tits to look out for at garden bird tables are the long-tailed tit and the coal tit. The tiny-bodied, long-tailed tit is unmistakable, as its name suggests, while its unusual mix of black, white and pink plumage make it a beautiful bird to spot. The coal tit is perhaps less colourful than many of the tit species, but its black crown and white nape make it straightforward to identify. This is a much shyer bird than the gregarious blue and great tit, so sightings are definitely something to treasure. There are, of course, many other species of bird to look out for. If you live near woodland, don't be surprised if a greater spotted woodpecker turns up, or the charming green woodpecker. And if you're fortunate enough to be visited by the juvenile woodpeckers of either species, they are indeed an added bonus. Also, you will quickly get used to the seasonal differences at your bird table and in your garden. Watch out for species like the house martin and the swallow, spring and summer visitors to British shores that are an absolute delight. If they choose to nest nearby, you are in for a wonderful bird watching treat annually, because incredibly, these elegant birds have such precise navigational skills that they will fly a 12,000-mile round trip and still return to the exact same nesting site year after year. Incidentally, if you want to tell these two species apart, look at the tail, which is longer and more streamlined on the swallow, while the house martin's tail is much shorter, and this lovely bird has a distinctive white rump, which makes identification absolutely certain. Understanding the different seasonal behaviour of the birds that visit your garden will obviously improve your chances of spotting migrating birds. However, looking at things from a seasonal perspective will also make your offerings at the bird table appropriate to the needs of each species, and again make your garden feeders all the more attractive to the birds. Feeding the birds in winter is of vital importance, helping them to survive. But surprisingly, food shortages can occur at any time. But there are nevertheless guidelines for both winter and summer feeding. During autumn and winter, if you're going to put food out, be sure to do it regularly, if possible, morning and afternoon, because the birds will need plenty of high-energy food if they are to survive the cold winter weather. But do be careful not to overfeed, and once you've established a bird feeding routine, stick to it. Here's a summary of points to consider for winter bird feeding. Establish a bird table and offer high-energy seed mixes along with kitchen scraps. Keep hanging feeders topped up with black sunflower seeds and sunflower-rich mixes and unsalted peanuts. Check the water supply every day to ensure it hasn't frozen over. Hang up fat balls or food bars, and if you have trees, rub fat into the cracks in the branches for species unlikely to join in the hurly-burly at the bird table, such as tree creepers and goldcrests. If you're considering putting up nesting boxes, the winter is a surprisingly good time to do it, as they will provide roost sites for the small birds. There is an added bonus too, because by the spring they will be well used to the boxes, and even the most timid species may well build their nests in them. When planting your garden, think ahead and include berry-bearing plants such as holly to provide a natural source of winter food. When it comes to spring and summer feeding, the birds will need high protein rather than foods with a high fat content, and live foods really do come into their own. Be careful only to supply nuts in small mesh feeders, so large pieces can't be taken and given to nestlings, or avoid nuts altogether if you're in any doubt. Alternatively, black sunflower seeds, mealworms, waxworms and fruits will be much better. Also, take great care with hygiene at the bird table, otherwise you may do more harm than good. To really help you make your garden as attractive to the birds as possible, here's a brief look at feeding tactics for each month of the year. In January, short days mean that feeding activity will probably be at its peak. When there is snow on the ground, clear an area to put food out, and even if there's no snow but the ground is frozen, put extra food out. Concentrate on high-calorie offerings that will sustain the birds through the cold, frosty nights. The same principles apply to February, which can be just as cold as January. If you have any windfall apples left, they would be very welcome. Make sure you keep your seed and peanut feeders well stocked up, and this should result in delightful winter visitors such as the blackcap. As March arrives and our thoughts turn to spring, don't cut back on the food offered. There can still be shortages, and as the birds will be breeding at this time, they'll be very glad of nutritious food. If you're going to try live foods, March is ideal. It's said that April comes in like a lion and goes out like a lamb, and by the end of this month the weather should be improving. In the bird world, many of the species will have hungry young mouths to feed. It's worth putting out mini mealworms as an extra incentive, as parents can feed them very easily to their chicks. Keep up the live foods in May and you'll be rewarded with some fabulous sightings of sparrows, finches, robins and tits. Here's an incredible fact. Blue-tit parents will feed on average 10,000 caterpillars to each of their broods, which in turn means an average of 1,250 per offspring. That's an awful lot of food to find, so you can see why live food offerings would be so welcome. With the fine weather in June, still continue to feed at the bird table because the fledglings preparing to leave their parents and summer migrant visitors, an active garden can be very busy indeed. By July, the summer is usually in full swing, but if the weather is hot, pay great attention to hygiene because the risk of disease spreading will be higher. August is an interesting month for garden birds, as even the species most comfortable and well adapted to a garden environment will head for the countryside in search of the natural harvest. However, if you keep your bird table and feeders well stocked, your carefully nurtured visitors might just stay at home. In September, the days will again begin to get shorter and summer visitors will head off to warmer climates. The demand for garden offerings will increase, most notably by the end of the month. October will be a great time to stock up on windfalls if you have fruit trees, as they can be stored and then fed to the birds right through the winter months. As the year draws to a close, heralded by a November temperature drop, it will be the beginning of the winter feeding season. Stock up on fat-based products and start to feed twice daily, morning and evening. December will find the human population rushing around preparing for Christmas, and the birds will be relying on garden offerings as the weather gets colder and food becomes scarce. However, don't forget that leftover Christmas cake, pudding or mince pies will make excellent bird food containing a high fat content and plenty of plump, juicy fruit, which your feathered friends will really enjoy as the old year ends, ready for the new year to begin. And sadly, our time considering how to attract British birds has also come to an end. Hopefully, you will have picked up plenty of ideas for transforming your own garden into a paradise for visiting birds, while working out how to enjoy watching them every day of the year. As your interest in birds grows, you will undoubtedly travel further afield to observe the rarest species in their natural environments. But few pleasures will ever compare with the first time that a blue-tit, robin, chaffinch, blackbird or sparrow visits your garden, when you start attracting British birds.